to hear from you. And as you've just seen, we are recording tonight's session.
Well,
Aaron, if you could turn to the next slide, please. So we'll be recording tonight's session, and and could I request, actually, if you're, could everyone turn their microphones to mute right now until you're ready to speak? But we're going to be recording tonight's session, and so just please keep that in mind. We will make it available on YouTube in the next couple of days. So on that note, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Aaron Maher, who will provide a land acknowledgement and tell you a little bit more about Parkways for People before we jump into the speakers. Aaron, over to you.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, if everyone could please turn their mics to mute, that would be very much appreciated. Apologies, that wasn't an automatic setting. That was my fault, so apologies. So we would like to do a land recognition, and just in doing so, I would just like to draw your attention to this beautiful photo here of a very serene trail in Gatineau Park. And a lot of us are coming to this meeting tonight with experiences, meaning, community that they've established through the park. And I just, with that in their minds, with everyone with that thought in our minds, I just like to acknowledge that that land that we all are also very grateful for is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Host Nation, who have lived on this territory for millennia. So just with the spirit of gratitude, I would like to just offer that tonight. A little bit about us. So we are just, here we are, Neil and I, but there are a few of us behind the scenes, Suzanne Wu, Susan Redding, and Rob Shudra, who is, I think, are all here tonight. We are a very grassroots organization that have come together with other organizations to sort of promote the parkways and sort of explore what else could be done on a transformative agenda in view of these spaces as truly public spaces, not just spaces for cars. We were inspired by the work of the NCC over the last few years, and we just kind of wanted to see if we could sort of establish a community of people who are supportive of pushing that further and seeing what we can do, because the properties, the land that we all enjoy so very much, we've seen how it can evolve over time and the use can evolve over time. So we're really just a bunch of very inspired people. We're not affiliated with the NCC. We like to hold these community sessions to allow for the voices to kind of come together and to have a really good, very grassroots dialogue. And we think that's a very effective way of running kind of a bit of a grassroots consultation. So that's a little bit about who we are. We've had a number of really amazing public sessions. All of these have centered around the Rideau Canal Parkways so far. And just put up some ideas on the screen here of the types of things that people have come forward with, just in view of kind of, encouraging you to share ideas that may seem or may feel like they're a little bit out there, or possibly, just feels, if they feel kind of impossible. Know that we kind of encourage that. We like people to think outside the box, push the envelope, and offer up ideas that you really think could work, because from things like riverside beaches to floating saunas, these things exist in other cities in the world. So we think, why not Ottawa? Why not Gatineau? So please do bring your inspirations forward tonight. It would be amazing to hear what you have to say about the Gatineau Park Parkways. So just in terms of tonight, after we announced this event, we kind of had a few people making comments right off the bat about what Gatineau Parkways what areas we could explore with the Gatineau Park Parkways. So, the feedback has been that over the last few years with vehicle-free times, that it's not just been, sort of successful, it's been really transformational to experience the parkways without vehicle traffic. We've also heard that accessibility and equity are very important, something that we strongly believe in too, that not everybody experiences the parkways, the same way, and we need to make sure that all abilities are recognized and provided for on the parkways. We also think, in that vein, that e-bikes, which have recently been sort of floated by the NCC as something they're looking at, and which Catherine will speak about, I think, later this evening, that could be a really important way of enhancing accessibility on the parkways, opening up those hills and the parkways to people who may not normally feel that's something that's accessible to them. So we really appreciate more dialogue on that and what e-bikes and e-devices could offer in terms of opening up the accessibility of the parkways. So those are some things that we've heard, things we'd encourage you to explore with your comments tonight. There are no doubt other themes that we encourage you to bring forward as well. So that's all I have to say for right now. So let me just end there and I'll turn it back to Neil.
Great, thank you very much, Erin. We have, as I mentioned, we have two speakers to start off tonight. We're going to start with Ian Lockwood to lay out the big picture for us. Ian Lockwood is a livable transportation engineer at Tool Design, who has helped communities across North America through some major transformations. Ian is a native son of Ottawa and a veteran of the Canadian Forces. He has a bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering from Carleton University and is a Harvard University Loeb Fellow. During his 34-year civilian career, Ian has helped a large number of communities and has been involved in pioneering some of the really key transportation movements in North America that have really shaped our cities. So that includes traffic calming, it includes complete streets, it includes highway removals. So we're very lucky to have Ian with us tonight to help. We really appreciate that Ian's been able to make some time for us to talk about some of the issues of equity when we're discussing the public realm. So we'll start with Ian, and then we'll turn to our second speaker, Catherine Vero from the NCC. But first, over to you, Ian.
Great, thank you, Neil. Great to be here. I'm super excited to talk to you about equity in the public realm. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Let me know if you can see it, and then I'll keep going. Okay, great. So I'm going to be talking about equity, and I'll just start with a little quick definition of it. So this is equality, where you treat everybody the same, and this is equity, where you help those who need it the most, and those people you don't need help, you don't have to help them. And so the issue about equity is to get the same sort of level of outcomes for the different groups involved. And in this case, it's arranging the boxes so that the short kid can see over the fence. But there's different ways of achieving equity. So we'll probably have all kinds of different ideas today about creating equitable access. But just so you know, there's lots of different ways of achieving that. I'm going to be talking about what I call micro equity and also macro equity. So different scales of equity, and I'm going to explore the boundaries of equity. And the idea is to put the discussion about the park in perspective. And I'm going to be talking about some of the more common equity issues that we come across in our business. I'm going to start with a little history of ground transportation. And the point of this slide is to show that cities and streets have been around for about 6,500 years. And they've evolved through trial and error over that time. And have always evolved to be urban places until about 85 years ago, when the car became popular, and then the cities changed dramatically at that point. Now, up to that point, streets were considered public spaces. They were used for everything from commerce to creating an identity, communication. Lots of things happened on streets, and for over 6,400 years. So 98.7% of the history of streets, they were slow speed spaces to allow all that sorts of functions to happen. And then in the 1930s, after cars became popular, there was a struggle about who got to dominate the street. And because of the sway of the automobile lobby and just the business of that, the motorists got to dominate, and all those other functions got relegated to the edges. And there was quite a campaign, between the two competing sets of interests, being a public space or a place for motorists. And at the time, up until the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of people who thought about different ways of accommodating different groups through separation, so that motors could go quicker and further. And then through that trial and error that had been going on for 6,500 years, a lot of the outcomes weren't that healthy for cities. And so many cities are starting to rediscover those traditional purposes of those public spaces as streets and starting to reclaim them for those other purposes. And this is just one example. So this is an intersection in a little city in Sweden where it was all designed around the motorist, and the traffic engineer dictated where you crossed, when you crossed, how fast you could go, who could go first, and so forth. And it wasn't having very good outcomes. It wasn't pleasant. It wasn't good for businesses, and it experienced a lot of crashes. And so they went back to more of kind of the traditional routes that predated the car, and decided to make it into a plaza and strip out all the conventional car components. And this is what it looks like in real life now. So there's no signals, stop bars, crosswalks, or anything like that. It's just a space, and people share the space, and it's actually called a shared space. It's actually on a major bus route. It's a pretty busy street because it leads into the city over a bridge across a river. And this is what it looks like on the ground. And you can tell by that car in the foreground that folks like to drive fast in this area, or at least some of them do. And they would probably prefer a higher speed environment. But this is a slow speed environment where all those pedestrians are quite comfortable in that space. Interestingly, that it takes less time to get through that intersection now than it did when it was traffic signal, because you're not sitting at a red light. But you go through slower, steadier, and in a shared manner. So it's become a public space again, and the retailing is doing better, and it's a more valuable place as a result. This is another example, and I just want to point it out that it's a barrier-free design. So folks using wheelchairs or pushing baby carriages or using walkers and so forth, bicycles, can get around again in a much more equitable manner. This is a project we did in a city in Texas, and you can see it's very automobile oriented, not very nice place to walk. So we made it nicer for people. There's the aerial view of the space that we worked on. We turned the parking lot into a plaza. We two-wayed all the streets, and they're all curbless now. So here's an event that's happening at that square. And those are the people I could see that have clearly, they have some sort of mobility impairment. But there's lots of people there that I can't see who have other impairments, but the entire place is now barrier-free. So everybody from that community can enjoy the space. These are what we call free-range children. They can come downtown now unsupervised, because the streets are much slower and their parents feel comfortable with them doing that, which wasn't the case before. So it's much more equitable for different people of different ages and ability levels. We're doing some research now into developing better ways to accommodate people with vision disabilities, because they're excluded from a lot of our public realm. And so it involves what we call directional indicators and warning services. And we can combine them in all kinds of different ways, something like Morse code, to give folks a lot more information about the public realm. And you can imagine trying to do Morse code if you only had dots. So with dots and dashes, you can get a lot more information to folks, and that's what we're doing. So to help people cross to transit stations, to find mid-block crosswalks, to help them navigate plazas and large public buildings, we can build tactile guides into the ground to make it equitable for everybody. Another thing we're big proponents of are roundabouts. They have about half as many crashes as signalized intersections, about 80 to 90% fewer deaths and injuries. However, people with vision disabilities can't discern whether a motorist is staying in the circulating road or leaving, so it's difficult to know when to cross. So we're developing a type of roundabout that better accommodates people with vision disabilities through all kinds of tactile indicators and also audible paving, so they can tell where the motorists are and where they're not. Now I want to move to this sort of the macro equity issues, and this has to do with what's called the tragedy of the commons. A long time ago, there was this story about a common grazing ground where anybody could graze their sheep, and it was rational and shepherds' self-interest to have their sheep graze on the common grazing ground because it saved their fields for later in the season. But if all the shepherds acted in their own self-interest and rationally, they would destroy the common grazing ground. So these common resources have to be managed, otherwise they can get abused and damaged. So it's called the tragedy of the common when you don't have proper public policy to govern a shared resource. And this has lots of other examples, like if everyone with a boat could catch as many fish as they wanted, we wouldn't have any fish in the oceans or lakes. If people could pollute without cleaning up, our air would be poisonous, though it's cheaper to manufacture without having to have clean technologies. And if anybody with a chainsaw could cut down and sell as many trees as they want, our forests would be highly damaged. So these are all examples of where public resources need to be managed for the benefit of society. Similarly, it's rational and in self-interest for most motorists to want to be able to use their car whenever, however, and wherever they want. And so it doesn't make sense that everybody should be able to do that. And so shouldn't we make the entire city easy to drive around however you'd like? But the cities that did that the most tend to be the worst cities. You know, just look at Detroit, Houston, places like that. They tend to damage themselves because the public resource, which is the city itself, gets damaged by that sort of totally car-oriented type thinking. So this is London, and they have a wonderful downtown, but it was getting inundated by motorists, which was spoiling the quality of the experience of the city, and the downtown itself, it's just ruining it for everybody because of the car's scale and its power and its speed, it was creating a lot of externalities on others. So they put in this congestion charging area. So it costs about $25 Canadian to just cross the line into that space, unless you live there. So it had, now there's a lot of equity issues here. Is it equitable to charge $25 to drive your car across the line? Well, what happened was, since 2001, you look at the bottom line. So car use went down in the downtown. The next line up, population went up, and the 4 lines above that, rail, bus, bike, and walking all went up. So it's a much nicer downtown now as the resource has been preserved, and it's better for more people. So the conclusion is it's good public policy, and it's good to protect that resource from overuse by cars. So there's 2 points to this. In the public realm, equity talks about the quality of the resource itself, whether it's a park or a downtown or a parkway or a street, and also the quality of the experience of the resource. And we'll get into more of that in a moment. So this is the same area in Ottawa. If we were to do the same thing, it could go from Island Park Drive all the way to the Rideau River, from Carleton University up to the Ottawa River. So that's about the same size as the area in London. And what would happen to Ottawa if we charged $25 to drive across that line? Would car use and car dependency in the downtown go down? Would walking and so forth increase? Who knows? I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but that's the same size, just to give you an idea of how big it is. So the idea about both of these situations is to tax the problem and reward the solution. That's the idea. Except in Ottawa, we're doing the opposite. We're taxing the solution, and we're rewarding the problem by building a wider Queensway. And arguably that's going to do damage to downtown, create more car dependency, more emissions and so forth. And the people in the downtown get to contribute their taxes to pay for it. So we're actually doing the opposite with that project. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So from an equity issue, here's a street in Detroit before they had any highways in Detroit. And that was it was Hastings Street. And on Hastings Street, that's where all the clubs and music and Motown was located. And this is what the street looked like before the highways. And the only thing you're going to recognize in the 3 after pictures is that church with the yellow arrow. So nice intact Main Street. And so what they did is they built I-375 right down it, obliterating the core of this community. And then over time, the rest of the community died off because of the loss of the heart. And so very little of it remains, and it's all been turned into logistics and motor vehicle oriented land uses. So from 1949 to today, Detroit became a very car dependent place, and they lost about 2/3 of their population. 2 out of every 3 people left town and moved out to the suburbs, leaving behind lower income browner and blacker people who could not afford to keep up the infrastructure, and the place went into bankruptcy. And so this this car-oriented policies was bad public policy and inequitable on several levels. This is Ottawa pre-highway. And when I was a little kid, there were no highways in Ottawa. And then in 1967, the Queensway opened, and here it is under construction. That's at Elgin Street. So you can see the swath of land that was consumed by the highway here, just about to cross the river. And there's Nicholas, again, taking up an enormous amount of land. And this is the swath that went through the entire city, right through neighborhoods along an old railway corridor. And that's what I call the blast zone. This is the area that got taken up by the highway, you know, severing relationships and consuming plenty of traditional components of the city. And that's what was there before. You can see the little streets and so forth that used to go down what that was now a highway corridor. Interestingly, in the 1960s, the fashion was to build highways in cities. And unfortunately, it turned out to be the least efficient way of moving people ever invented. And so it carries like 600 to 1,600 people per hour per lane. And you can see what the others carry. And ironically, they took out a train line, which could have carried 10 times the number of people and probably changed the trajectory of Ottawa to be much more sustainable and livable had they actually kept the rail line instead of made it into a highway. Anyway, that's what we're doing. We're doubling down on highways in Ottawa right now. And this is the what I would call locationally disadvantaged growth areas on the periphery. And when you think about equity, about who pays for things, it's good to look at this diagram. Above the horizontal line is the amount of revenues that the suburbs generate compared to the urban areas, and then the servicing costs. And so you can see the suburbs aren't paying their way. Their services cost way more than they generate. So the areas that are benefiting by the Queensway expansion, for example, aren't paying their fair share, and the places that are urban are not only paying through their taxes for those highways, they're also paying with their quality of life. This is a little cartoon I drew about this. Yo, inner city, I choose to exercise my freedom to reside in the suburbs. Now I want to drive fast through here without delay. So I demand that public taxes be spent to widen your roads, lower your safety, health, quality of life. Fair deal, want to shake on it? So there's a lot of euphemisms that help support this normal practice. But I just want to emphasize what's normal and what's equitable are often different. And though it's normal practice, it's not equitable. So that's just what I wanted to point out there. So the question is, will Ottawa be a better city? And will it be more equitable if we build more of this? And I think the answer is pretty clear. It won't be, it'll be less equitable. And especially when it costs $2.6 billion for what they're doing out there. I just read some studies online about what you get from an infill house compared to a greenfill house. So if you build a home in infill, it generates an additional, after paying for services and so forth, you're ahead about $600 to $800. If you build in a greenfill, you're behind, or you marginally get some benefits. So we're rewarding the problem and taxing the solution by rewarding that sort of development. But what would happen if we decided instead to use that $2.6 billion to subsidize at $100,000 each, maybe 26,000 homes in infill development? It would help our businesses because there'd be more people next to them. They could use existing transit services. All the utilities are already there. And it would generate, after paying for services, another $31,000 to $40,000 or $1 million rather per year to the tax base. So infill development is probably better than rewarding sprawl type development in highways. And again, it's an equity issue for those who are paying for it and those who suffer the consequences of more car dependency. So what are we going to do in the future? I don't know, but hopefully we'll start trying to protect our cool resources that we have downtown from this sort of thinking. I just want to point out that having started to work in the States, we've noticed equity issues on a different level altogether. And some of their highways were racially motivated, and so it went beyond just equity problems because they were targeting people based on their ethnic and racial groups. And this wasn't just in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Just a few months ago, we were involved in stopping Interstate I-45 widening through Houston. And it was the first highway expansion in the United States history that was stopped by environmental injustice, which is racial injustice. And so that was decided by the federal government to call that one out and stop it based on those problems. Which brings me to a project that's happening in Brampton right now. Brampton's expanding to the west in a place called Heritage Heights. The MTO wants to build a big highway called Highway 413 through this area. This is their 2014 plan to do that. And the city asked us to help them with a transit-oriented plan that's based on a boulevard. So the choices are building a big highway, another 400 series highway, 6 to 8 lanes, or a boulevard with a connected network of streets that's transit-oriented, geared to the people that are going to be living there. And this family was featured in the Globe and Mail recently because they can pay for their house and car, but it's very difficult for them to get ahead because of those expenses. And I just want to point out that the car is a particularly high expense proportional to people's take-home pay. So in our plan, everybody's within a proximity of a higher order transit. One of them is a GO line that'll go down to downtown Toronto. Everyone's within a 5-minute walk of a school, and everyone's within a 3-minute walk of a park. And there's a robust network of connected separated bike paths and trails so that everyone can get to school and parks easily on foot and by bike. So the whole thing's designed to be toward short trips and active transportation. Now the MTO says we have to build highways and be car-oriented because of jobs. Interestingly, this group, this group of independent economists were hired to look at the two plans, and the direct jobs, indirect jobs, and construction jobs were more than double with the boulevard plan. The population was double, the tax base was higher, and it's got a really great high quality of life where people can walk, and much more equitable for pedestrians, cyclists, low-income folks, more money left over to help with affordable housing, that kind of thing. So when you look at all of the issues that got damaged by the highway plan, you have to think to yourself, in a predominantly brown area, that there may be a race issue here. And I've met a lot of the people involved with this highway, and I don't think they're racist, but I think there's these implicit biases in their models and in their practices that allow inequitable outcomes to occur. And that happens throughout transportation planning, not just the Queensway and the overspecialization of parkways and so forth for motorists, which I'll cover in a second. It happens with highways as well. So I imagine in San Francisco, it's rational in the self-interest of a motorist to want to use this highway through downtown and go really quickly, 120K through the downtown. But it's not good public policy, and it's not equitable for everyone else using the downtown. So it was removed by an earthquake, and it was not replaced. And so it's a much more equitable place. Same thing in Korea when this highway was removed. You see the vulnerable people on the edge and the powerful people in their cars dominating the space in the middle. So that was replaced with a linear park down the river that was underneath the highway. And just to get into the parks a bit, this is the Bronx River Parkway project that we worked on. And what the folks were noticing was that the highway was getting more and more highway-like. This part was widened to 4 lanes with barriers, and it was starting to spoil the park experience and the resource. And so we did a restoration plan to bring it back to its intent. And just further up the road, it becomes 6 lanes, and they've really spoiled the park experience and the resource. And so we think this is bad public policy, and it's not equitable. So Gatineau Park is an incredible resource right on the doorstep of Gatineau and Ottawa. And it's really important to protect this resource, just like it's important to protect the city and the downtown and air quality and so on. Now, it might be in one's self-interest and rational to drive through this during fall colors. But if everyone were to do it, it spoils the experience of the space and it can spoil the park. Now, this is a big park. We could easily expand this to maybe 6 lanes or 8 lanes, make it a big freeway so a lot more people can drive through it. But that would diminish the experience some more and diminish the resource. So though it's possible, it's not good policy. So this is the third thing I just want to close with is nobody is entitled to use their car in a public space. Using a car is a privilege, and the space, the downtown, the park, the parkway is more important than your self-interest of using your car. Lastly, we need public policy regarding the public realm, whether it's a common grazing ground, a park, a parkway, or a downtown. This is necessary to have public policy to govern this. I'm going to suggest that just about all public policy is imperfect. Not everybody's going to be happy with all the outcomes, but good public policy that helps save the resource and helps increase equity is better than perfect public policy that never happens. So we have to have the policy and we do it as best as we can. And then I just end on that public policy regarding these issues needs periodic change and updating and so forth as things evolve. And that's, I think, what the spirit of this discussion is about. So we just need to think that there's people with different capabilities and different viewpoints, different needs, and we really need to work together to dialogue this periodic change that's happening to make the public policy more perfect and more equitable. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. That's those are some really enjoyed that presentation, and it really helps frame our thinking on the question of how we address equity in the public realm. We spent a fair bit of time there looking at the Ottawa side of the region. So I'd like to jump over to the other side now and call on Catherine Verreau, the Director of Quebec Urban Lands in the Gatineau Park of the NCC. And Kathleen, I have to be honest, that sounds like an incredible job. I'm sure we're all very jealous of someone that gets to do this day in, day out. Catherine has been with the NCC for more than 15 years. She's a biologist and a botanist by training from the Universities of Ottawa and McGill. And when Catherine is not at work, you can probably find her out enjoying the Gatineau Park itself. So Catherine, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here tonight to talk to you about the Gatineau Park Parkways program for this summer, for 2022, but particularly this summer. Next slide, please. Am I able to change them myself or?
No, I don't think so. If you can just give us a cue when to change.
Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So tonight we'll be discussing 4 different aspects of this project. So the summer shuttle pilot project, the electrical assisted bikes rental, elements to increase user security on the parkways, and the parkway schedule planning. So for as an introduction, I'd say that the recent Gatineau Park Master Plan and the Gatineau Park Sustainable Transportation Plan both promote the access to and transportation within Gatineau Park by alternate means. And this is a vision we have for the next 30 to 50 years. But now it's coming into form, it's shaping into form. And this is in order to reduce progressively vehicle circulation in the park and to improve the experience and security of all users, to ease the travel and increase environmental quality. So one of the 4 goals of the Gatineau Park Master Plan is to provide an equitable and sustainable access. Therefore, Gatineau Park will maintain the dual role of the parkways to provide access to the activity sites and represent a source of recreation in their own right. The comprehensive approach in the sustainable management of visitor experience and transportation has the following objectives that you see. So to reduce the impact of traffic on the park's ecosystem, so reduction of the greenhouse gases and improving the habitat quality for fauna, and also reduce road mortality and the negative impacts on wildlife overall. To ensure equitable access to activity sites, provide a safe and quality experience. You see that, experience of visitors experience is something we really want to privilege, and to reduce conflicts between visitors. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's begin with this summer first initiative. We're pleased to announce that the NCC will be introducing a new shuttle pilot project for this summer on weekends. The shuttle will run Saturdays and Sundays from 9 to 5. There will be a bus every 30 minutes or so. It's going to be free of charge for the first year. And the service will be provided by STO. So it's a partnership with the local transport provider. They will be using 40 feet accessible buses. So our goal is to have all stops accessible. Next slide, please. So there will be 11 different stops that you see on the screen right now. Most of them are going to be similar to what is available for the Fall Rhapsody shuttle. So the first one would be the Supreme Court in downtown Ottawa or close to the light rail train station. Des Allumetières Laurier, then Montcalm Rapibus. Then the first one in Gatineau Park would be Gamelin or P3, Pink Lake, Mackenzie King Estate, then Mulvey Hill Lake Loriot Trail, King Mountain, Champlain Lookout, and then going down to Camp Fortin to finish at the Gatineau Park Visitor Center, which is a change from what we have during Fall Rhapsody. And we think it's very important to link the visitor center to the different points or attractions on the Parkway system. Our goal is really for people to leave their car if they come to Chelsea or downtown by car, and then access the park to the shuttle as much as possible. Next slide, please. So the other item or the other project we're proposing for this summer is we want to increase the access to the parkways, not just by providing a shuttle, but by pursuing the agreement with Relais Plein Air to offer assisted electric bikes rental service. So we had that service last year and the year before at Relais Plein Air, but now we'd like to have another location, more core, closer to the parkways, either P8 or Mackenzie King Estate, where people could rent electric assisted bikes to increase access, as we were mentioning. And we think it could be a good thing to increase access for people who are not super athletes and can visit all the different attractions in Gatineau Park with their bikes, or by hiking, or by running, or other means like that. We're also looking at possibilities to have companies offering guided tours with those bikes, because we're conscious that it's not everybody that comes in the park say, I can't ride a conventional bike, I'll rent this electric bike and go up and down all the parkways. There's different issues with the steepness of the different hills. So we're conscious of that. So we're looking at different things. And we also want to be helping Relais Plein Air to offer adapted electric vehicles for people with disabilities to experience the parkways, the little quads, or for people who don't really have that, but could, access the Relais Plein Air with the STO bus, for example, and then hang up to that and, be able to visit the parkways or go to other location like Pink Lake, which is kind of close. Next slide, please. So another initiative is really to increase security for all users on the parkways. So for that, we have two different new initiatives. One is to reduce the speed limit on Champlain and Gatineau Parkways to 50 kilometers per hour. It's now 60. And Fortune Parkways would remain the same at 40 kilometers per hour. Radar speed signs will also be installed to remind users of reducing their speed, and we will revamp and promote the Share the Road campaign. Next slide, please. So another initiative will be to install the designated shared roadway concept on the parkway network. So signage and markings on the ground will be installed at entrances to the parkways, indicating that roadways are shared with cyclists. Don't expect that to happen in May. It could take some time depending on the resources availability, but it's supposed to happen during the season. If we can do it in May, it's going to be great, but there could be some delays for this, but it's surely our intent to do it this summer. Next slide, please. So last but not least, the parkway schedule. This is an overview of the parkway schedule planning history, just to remind everybody where we're coming from. So until 2018, the parkways were open to motor vehicle all the time, except for Sunday bike days and closures of the North Loop or Mika North Loop Saturday mornings and Tuesday evenings. So there were certain closures for active mobility, but not so much. In 2019, then we introduced the night closures 30 minutes after sunset. It went well. This was mostly for environmental reasons and to stop the non-desirable behavior that were happening after sunset at that in the park. And then in 2020, it was marked by the beginning of the pandemic. And so we took the opportunity to change the schedule radically. The parkways were open to motor vehicles only on Saturday afternoons in the summer and on every afternoon during Fall Rhapsody. We had feedback coming. We see how it happened. Last year, we opened the parkways to motor vehicle on Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sunday afternoons to give access for people who needed the car to access the different points in the park, or little families with little children. And the different people that were not necessarily able. We always use the image of not climbing, all the parkways up to the Champlain Lookout on a bike, but the traditional bike. But this was in order to test another scenarios. We, of course, we had good feedback and feedback that people were not so happy. During Fall Rhapsody, it was also open every afternoon. So next slide. So we can't please everyone, but we wanted to share with you for this year and for the coming years, what is the basis of the parameters we're thinking about or we're taking into account when we actually plan for the parkway schedule. So, of course, the Gatineau Park Master Plan objectives and the Gatineau Park Sustainable Transportation Plan objectives that I stated at the beginning. Safety of visitor, access to the greatest number of visitors as well. Impact on traffic, easy to communicate. And of course, there's operational issues like HR and the closure and opening of all the different barriers and everything takes some staff and a lot of planning. Sometimes it could seem seamless, but my colleagues work very hard on planning everything into that. So those are the main things we take into account in planning the schedule for next year. The schedule should be announced soon, but we're still consulting with people, and we're happy to be here and part of this discussion tonight to hear what you have to say.
Great, thank you very much, Kathleen. That's been a tremendously useful presentation for all of us to see what some of the thinking is going forward. What I'd like to do now is open the floor to participants and hear your thoughts on what's being put forward tonight. I've got one hand up, which we'll turn to in a minute. If you would like to speak, please use the raise hand function on your screen, which is normally under the reactions button. If you can't find it, you can always just put up your hand, and we'll see you that way too. But what we'll do is we'll encourage people to communicate their ideas and their thoughts that they would like to, the comments that they would like to put forward. We will, I don't want to turn this into like a Q&A back and forth, but we'll certainly invite our speakers to jump in at any point in the discussion that they would like. So let's start with our first speaker, who goes by the name of iPhone 2. So iPhone 2, if you'd like to start us off, please.
Sorry, my name is Dr. Jacinthe Lampron. I am a trauma surgeon and the medical trauma director at the Ottawa Hospital. I'm wordless. This is extremely disappointing, this pilot project. I mean, from a medical surgical point of view, I cannot see that not being unsafe. Like having buses next to active transport, it's just nonsense. Like I don't know if you know, but last year at the Ottawa Hospital, there was at least 66 major bike crash, like major, having multiple fracture, requiring surgery, requiring being hospitalized, and that number just keep on going every year. So we have to be safer, not more pro motorized. So I don't know what's the idea behind that, but I believe we need to leave more space for active transport, bicycle, electrical bicycle, ski, whatever people want to do. And mixing both bring a very dangerous combination. So having something more like the previous year, sometime reserved for active transport, and sometimes that it could be shared, but acknowledging that the active transport usually are much less active during that period of time. And the other thing, it cannot be good for the park to have buses, huge buses running kind of all season long. I really hope NCC will reconsider that. Like from a safety point of view, it really, really breaks my heart. Like I don't want more business. I don't want more patient in trauma. And unfortunately, we do have too many cyclists in, from that area. So that's what I had to say. Really hope that this health part will be considered in NCC decision for their pilot project.
Thanks very much. Now there are, I want to mention there are a number of comments that have been put forward in the chat. We'll turn to those in a minute, but first I'd like to allow some others to share their views verbally and give us some feedback on what they've heard or what they think is worth highlighting. Is there anyone else that would like to jump in at this point?
Yeah, I think I just want to echo what the doctor said. Having had accidents myself, going around buses and between buses, breaking a hand, etc., while cycling, I know that mixing groups of cyclists and large buses on narrow roads is just an opportunity for accidents to happen. I do like the idea of having dedicated times for active users and then dedicated times for communicated shared use. And then during those communicated times of shared use, people will probably be a lot more alert and not go out in groups, as an example, right? So I think that would be an approach that I would favor over having a 9 to 5, buses and cyclists on the parkway on Sundays and Saturdays. I would just not go to the park on weekends if that was the case.
Thanks for that comment. Let's turn to Catherine and then to Johanna.
Great. Thank you so much for organizing this and for the NCC being willing to come forward with some of your hopefully planned ideas that are still open for discussion. In the spirit of the first presentation, I was hoping for something much bolder from the NCC for the summer. I've been an active user for many years, and the closed to cars is, for me as a cyclist, the only solution in Gatineau Park. I think it was last fall, you had the buses running. There are places where coming down Fortune, as one example, there was barely enough room for me to remain on the road with the bus. So it's really critical for the NCC to look at this space if you're going to run a full-sized bus. It's unpleasant. The bus drivers are better than cars because I hope they will lose their jobs if there's an interaction or altercation with cyclists. The idea that you're reducing speed to 50 kilometers does basically nothing because you do nothing to enforce speed in the park. I was closed past last year so many times trying to use the park in the off season, in the fall season. We all know that cars are driving 80 to 100 kilometers an hour in that place. So if you're not using photo radar or you have no one out there enforcing speed, that's doing nothing. So frankly, I find, like the trauma surgeon, find this very disappointing. Last summer, I had the opportunity to experience the park with my 13-year-old son. And it's very different to ride in the park with a new cyclist and somebody who's new to cycling, road cycling. It's very different to not have any vehicles on the road, even to have a bus on the road with a teenager who's new to this sport. I wouldn't really feel comfortable. So I really would hope that perhaps this shuttle idea could be implemented for half the day on the weekends and give active users full run of the park for at least the other half of the day. I know that it's always about equity, and I'm all for that, but there are many points of access to the park that where you can use provincial roadways that do not disturb the active users of the Gatineau Parkway. There are many provincial roads with parking lots and hiking points that you can access by potentially shuttles using other roads other than the Gatineau Parkways. So I hope that, and I didn't really catch the plan for the midweek, but I really do not endorse sharing the road with a bunch of buses, full-size buses. Thank you for allowing us to speak about this tonight.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Johanna, nice to see you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, Neil. A long time. Johanna Lucha from Action Vélo Outaouais and from Vélo Plaisir. We're big users of the park for cycling and all kinds of activities. We've actually, Action Vélo Outaouais, we've actually been asking for and waiting for a shuttle service in the park, so we do welcome that. I would actually much rather share the road in the park with a bus than with 100 cars. I would much prefer to only share it with active users, with cyclists and walkers, let's be clear. But bus are moindre mal. Although perhaps they could be smaller, or could be, would agree with others that having at least part of the days where there are no buses at all would really be preferable. I wasn't clear in the presentation about the plan for where the bus, like the bus route. Trying to imagine two buses crossing in Fortune is a bit scary, I have to say, as a cyclist. If I'm going down Fortune, there's a bus going down and there's another one coming up. So I wasn't clear if it was going to be a loop or not, but hopefully it's a loop, and the buses are not going to be going up and down Fortune, because that's really very narrow and a scary thought. And apart from that, we haven't really talked about the electric assisted bicycles. Really welcome the NCC's plan to be exploring that, and they are absolutely a game changer, both for kind of the sport cyclists, but also as for disabled people as assisting devices, and really hope to see developments on this summer and in coming years. They are game changers, and I suspect that 2-3 years from now, we're going to be having very different conversations about how we use the park in the summer with that. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Johanna. Jim, over to you. Jim, you're on.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. Thank you for having me. And thank you for the presentations this evening. The first one, I agree 100% about the urban planning, no question. There was very little on the rural planning, and if you were to, all the things that have happened with the Gatineau, with the parkways within the city of Ottawa have been fantastic. I think it's wonderful, but the Gatineau Parkway is very different from the parkways in the city. There are many places along the parkway that are only accessible by the Gatineau Parkway. In the city, there are multiple access points to all the parkways in the city, but in the Gatineau Parkway, that's not the same thing. And so the closing of the parkway, first of all, I'm a former professional athlete. I have cycled in the Gatineau Parkway for over 40 years, and I'm legally deaf. And I have never had an issue between myself as a cyclist and a vehicle, because I'm a responsible cyclist, number one. The issue on the parkway is the cyclists who give everybody else a bad name, and those are the ones who cycle 2, 3, 4 abreast a time, and those are the ones that are creating the issues with the cars, not the responsible cyclists for the most part. Secondly, the e-bikes. The e-bikes I see in the chat is going to be charged. People with disabilities, if you're not aware, most people with disabilities live in poverty. And you're going to be charging those people who are the most vulnerable in the population to use e-bikes if they're not able to access the park because they have mobility issues. I think that's just wrong. You have young families, you have people who don't know how to ride bikes, you have people with who are senior citizens who are terrified to ride e-bikes and so forth. That's just, e-bikes is a great step, but it's not a solution. And the question I had is, on the weekends when you're on the shuttle service, are cars going to be allowed to be on the parkway as well? Because that hasn't been indicated one way or another. So you could potentially have cars and shuttle buses and active users on the parkway. I personally loved it, the way it was set up before the pandemic, where it was closed on Sundays and most Saturdays it was closed as well. And so I don't know why you can't just keep the parkway closed till, let's say, and open it up every day at 10 a.m., Monday to Friday. And because if you're an active user and you're an elite cyclist, you'll get up in the morning and you'll get your loops in on the parkway, and then you can cycle on Sunday mornings. If you are, up until 1 o'clock, 11 o'clock when it's closed for those special events. I think that's a great compromise. Closing it till 10 o'clock in the morning, and then the vehicles will be allowed to get on at that point. So, and then the parkway, I don't know why there is the room for it. If there is an issue, then why don't you build cycling paths along the side of the parkway? Add a couple of meters on each side. It's not going to be as expensive because you don't need to have the same construction as you would for a vehicle. And you do have the room on each side of the parkway to do that. You can make it much more safer. on the top, you know, the first presenter was talking about making a 6-lane parkway. That's never going to happen, but certainly make it safer for active users to use it. And on each side, create another meter. It is not going to be that as expensive. And I bet in the long term, it's going to be a lot cheaper than running a shuttle service. So, and then when you go down in the future, are you going to have, if you're trying to cut back on CO2 and all the other things that go with combustion vehicles, will you allow the vehicle, an electric vehicle on the parkway because they're carbon neutral? Who knows, right? So anyways, I said my piece. I think that we should go back to the way the parkway was before the pandemic hit and widen the parkway, make it accessible to all people, not just athletes. Really, it is athletic to ride in the parkway. And the e-bikes is good, but it's not going to solve things. You have young families, you have new immigrants that can't afford expensive bikes, and the e-bikes, well, that's just terrible for people who are living below the poverty line already. So thank you very much.
Jim, thanks for those comments. Let's turn it to Michel.
Merci pour nous accueillir dans les deux langues. Thank you very much for accommodating French and English in your presentation. Those who've done it, I appreciate it greatly. I represent the Ottawa Bicycle Club, and as you may know, we celebrated our 50th anniversary last year, and we have typically over 1,000 members every single year. We range from beginning cyclists who have never ridden in groups before to elite cyclists that use the park for either training or just healthier purposes. But the most important part is that we have a group of youth cyclists that are trying to make their way through the ranks and graduate to the elite level at some point. But those 250 young people have about 50 coaches working with them. And the park is an essential part of what can be done for training cyclists and welcoming just amateur cycling around. The challenge that we're having is that if we don't have a designated available time where there's no traffic danger, then we lose an awful lot of training and trying to encourage people to actually ride properly on open roads. The challenge, and some people in Quebec, it's obvious that you have to ride single file. In Ontario, double file is used more commonly because of the speed of passing. But if we don't have access to the park when there are no vehicles using the park, then we can do something. If we're always met with, and by the way, I've lived at the bottom of the Gatineau Park for the last 15 years, and I don't know if most of you know, but there's a racing league for motorcycles and for cars up and down that road for most every evening. I know COVID certainly curtailed that a lot, but it was a very dangerous situation for many years. COVID sort of helped us through that. So the only comment that I really want to emphasize is that if we have segregated times where we can use the park without vehicle interruption, be it cars or buses or anything else, then we can actually get to enjoy the park as a cycling organization. So I'll leave somebody else to talk about amateur cycling, but I welcome your comments if you have any.
Michelle, thanks very much. Suzanne, over to you.
Hi, Catherine. I just wanted to ask you to clarify, maybe there might be a little bit of confusion because I'm not sure if it's clear. Will there be cars and buses allowed at the same time?
The schedule is not decided yet. It's a possibility, but it's not. Nothing is decided. So as I say, we're welcoming comments, we're listening to everything, but I just want to make sure that we try to accommodate everybody to make sure that everybody has access. And there's still going to be days without cars. Okay, we're not going back totally to what was happening before, because from the comments I heard, maybe I did not make that clear. But for the schedule for the weekends, it's not decided, neither for the week. Nothing is set in stone. We're looking at different options, as I say, but we're actually listening very well to what you're saying too.
Okay,
So I don't want to address everything. I just, wanted to answer that.
Yeah. Another question is just wondering if there is any possibility to consider a lower speed limit than 50 kilometers per hour.
Yes and no. From what we did not, take that out of our hat. We had studies made by Dillon Consulting for that. And that's what they suggested, but at the same time they said it would not work, because usually that's not, lowering the speed limit is not what deters people from speeding. It's just, we have to change the configuration, the geometry of the road. Speed radars and everything are other type of things that work well or would, do a better job. So that's why we're trying to implement many different things, but at the same time, while we're reducing the amount of hours where vehicles are present, we hope that, we're going to be able to share the road, and that over time, because, we won't solve all the problems next season, we know, but over time we'll find a combination and we'll build habits so that people can share the road in certain time, probably, or not, or, who knows what the future is, but for, if we think about next season, that at least some behavior are going to change. And, it's going to be, we're going to be able to raise awareness about that more, and, maybe have more enforcement too. But that's not what's something we have totally under our control. So for people who don't know, it's the RCMP who are in charge of, having more enforcement. Enforcement in the park. So the speeding tickets and all the things like that is not under our conservation officers authority.
Thank you.
Karen, let's turn to you, please. Karen, you're on mute.
Thank you, Neil. I'm an active person, I would consider myself, but I'm also 65. I'm a heart patient. I have young kids in our family. I've got an elderly mother. So in terms of, I've got an accessibility permit for carrying anything. If I ever want to bring a small bag into the park, if I want to bring a bike, if I want to bring a kid, my mother, there are a lot of points in the park that are accessible through the parkway, and the multi-use appeals to me, and with some periods where the more active users, because I consider myself an active swimmer, an active walker, an active cyclist, but I wouldn't ride all the way from the middle of Ottawa up to the park to cycle. So I'm one of those people. Excuse me. As a caregiver, I'm very aware. I watch all of the young families with little kids who roam around, excuse me, and who bring guests, all the people who bring guests back to where they've grown up, where they've walked. Excuse me. And there are many people in the Ottawa and the Outaouais region who really love the Gatineau Park. It is not only a parkway, it is a walking way. Excuse me. So I would really like there to be access for seniors, disabled, young families. And I certainly find when there have been periods where active cyclists, more active cyclists are given priority, it rules out an enormous segment of the population. And that's why I'm on this call, to advocate for a better access for more people and safer for all. So therefore, yes, you might want to figure out how to, les stage periods where you have, again, the more active users, but calling people active users who ride their bikes from Westboro or from Canada up to the Gatineau Hills is ruling out an awful lot of people who are regular, normal, active users of parkways, of parks, of trails, who love doing it with other people who may not be as active. So I'm advocating for that. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Karen. Chloe, over to you.
Oui, merci. Je vais m'exprimer en français, ça vous va? Je suis plus à l'aise en français. Désolée pour ceux-là qui sont unilingues anglophones. Donc, dans le fond, moi, je suis une cycliste utilitaire d'abord, puis après ça, j'ai découvert le cyclisme pour le fun par la suite. Mais sûrement que vous avez déjà tout entendu les arguments. Mais tu sais, l'année passée, je suis allée dans le parc avec mes neveux nièces de moins de 10 ans, chose que je n'aurais jamais fait à vélo avant, quand il y avait des autos. Et aussi avec mes deux parents de plus de 65 ans qui ont leur vélo électrique, qui, eux, n'iraient pas dans le parc s'il y avait des autos parce qu'à cet âge-là, ils ont un peu moins de ballon, puis ils sont un peu moins à l'aise avec les voitures. Je m'estime étant cycliste utilitaire, je m'estime être assez habituée de circuler avec des autos. Je circule sur le boulevard Saint-Joseph avec des autos, fait que ça peut vous donner une idée de mon niveau de confort avec les autos. Mais le parc est certainement une des routes les plus dangereuses que j'utilise à vélo lorsqu'il y a des autos, malheureusement. Donc, c'est une des routes où je file le moins safe à vélo avec des autos. Pour ce qui est des autobus, sûrement que vous êtes au courant aussi, mais il y a 2 ans, avant la pandémie, j'avais utilisé votre système de navette durant le coloris automnal avec ma famille. En fait, j'avais essayé de l'utiliser, mais elles étaient complètes dès Ottawa, ce qui faisait en sorte que moi, habitant à Gatineau, j'étais incapable de prendre la navette. Donc, juste peut-être avoir gardé ça, puis garder une certaine adaptabilité durant l'année pour ajouter des navettes si jamais c'est trop populaire, parce que c'est quand même frustrant d'attendre une demi-heure pour le prochain autobus pour que celui-là soit encore complet. Donc, au final, on va faire de bord. Puis, j'aimerais savoir, mais peut-être que vous n'avez pas la réponse non plus, ou vous n'avez pas encore prévu ça, mais est-ce que la CCN a prévu ou a déjà fait des études sur l'impact, dans le fond, des voitures dans le parc versus les temps où est-ce qu'il n'y a pas de voitures, sur le niveau de pollution pour en général, la qualité de l'air, mais aussi sur la faune, l'impact sur la faune. Donc, est-ce que c'est quelque chose que vous planifiez faire? Voilà. Merci.
OK, merci, Chloé. Benoit? Benoit, you're on mute too.
I was looking for the button, the unmute button. So Benoit Rouleau from Vélo Plaisir and strong supporter of Action Vélo Outaouais. Well, first I would like to ask, please, 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 no more cars. Please, 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 no widening of the roads, where the only thing that would do would be to shove the cyclist and all the active users of the park on the side, giving the middle of the road to the cars, who would then feel like king of the road, like they feel everywhere else in the cities. And as soon as you go out of your little lane on the side of the road as a cyclist or as a walker, you get the horn, you get the water bottle behind the head, you've got shout at. So please, no segregation of cyclists on the side of the road. Let's share the road. Let's find a way to share the road, not shove people. And let's try to reduce traffic rather than augment it. That being said, I am 100% in support of sharing the park with everyone else, making it way more accessible than it ever was. On that front, I was wondering, was there any time where the NCC actually counted the number of users, where when the park is shared, how many people are there in the cars? How many cyclists? How many walkers? How many in general are in the park versus when the park is closed to motorists? I'm very curious. I would be very curious to know the impact on the attendance, the overall attendance. That could guide some good decision making here. About the buses, some people talked about the Fortune, which is probably the narrowest, but it's not the only one that is narrow. Huge 40 feet buses won't fit in most of the parkways anyways, no matter what you do. So in a matter of giving better service, more frequent, with safer access for everyone, if you reduce the size of the buses and take minibuses and you double the amount of buses and you make them pass every 15 minutes instead of 30 minutes, that gives a better access to everyone. Frequent, make it 10 minutes if it's, make it 5 minutes, you know, just add more smaller buses rather than humongous mastodons that can barely share with we're talking about cyclists, but let's think about two gigantic buses trying to cross each other, or just regular car and a bus. I don't see how it is viable and how it can be secure for anyone, and especially the active users of the park. About the lower speed limits, if there is no way to enforce that, it will not change one thing. It's the park. People use that as a speedway. So if there is no active, frequent speed control, it will not change anything. You can put it to 20 kilometers an hour. It just won't change anything. So we need active ways of enforcing the speed limit. Finally, with Vélo Plaisir, I'm actually working with APHVO, which is l'Association des Personnes Handicapées Visuelles de l'Outaouais, so blind people of the Gatineau Ottawa side, on a tandem tandem cycling project. And this project is aiming at going on most of the roads in the area and doing rides with blind people with a conductor from Vélo Plaisir, or a seeing person, obviously. I don't see how this is possible if there's too many cars or big buses. It's even worse than regular cyclists, because these things are a little bit longer, a little bit wider. So and the blind person not seeing what's happening, those big mastodon buses passing them by with no warning, could be very frightening and very it could actually derail this project, at least for the Gatineau Park area. So this is another thing to consider if you're considering free access for everyone. Think of the blind people and this pilot project that is coming hopefully this year. We're working real hard to find the bike right now. The project is on its way as soon as we find bikes to accommodate the people. So thank you very much for that.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, Benoit. Lisa, your turn.
Thank you. I'm just, okay, there we go. Firstly, thank you for the presentation and for this event. It's really appreciated to have this opportunity to share our views and our insights on this. Now, it sounds like my dogs are getting agitated, so if they start barking, I'll have to give this to someone else. I'm an active person. I run, I cycle, I do all sorts of things. So I am an active user of the park. I will attest personally to all the close passes that I have had as a cyclist in the park, even if I'm being a good cyclist, as some would like to say. So I do I'm relatively experienced, but maybe a bit nervous. And I want to think about the less experienced users and say maybe that accessibility and equity goes both ways. It's not just about giving access to those who maybe can't get on a bike to come, but also to think about the youth and inexperienced cyclists or other users that might be using the park. As a user during the pandemic, I was enthralled to see all the users that I saw on the parkways on those days when there were no cars. And when there are cars, you go into the park and the only people using the park then are elite athletes. So there is a whole component of the user population that's disappearing when the cars are in the park. That said, I mean, as much as I think from a conceptual basis, no cars in the park makes a lot of sense, I do support sharing. My only comment about sharing would be, instead of making it about mornings and afternoons the way it had been in the past, I would suggest sharing days, full days, because what as someone who works 40 to 50 hours a week, I don't find that I can get out in the morning to use the park. And so if the park is only available to active users in the morning, it still rules out certain people who don't have the time to go in the morning. So my only suggestion would be that. And lastly, I mean, I support having the park closed because it increases active users, and I would advocate for anything that will contribute to improving public health, because I believe that everyone would be better if they were active. And if we give an infrastructure to people to be active and they use it, that's better for the entire community. Thank you.
So Neil, this is Ian. I don't know how to raise my hand when I'm a co-host. Is that even possible?
Go ahead, Ian.
Okay, sorry about that. I've been trying to find it on my screen for like half an hour. I have a whole page of comments, but I'm going to limit it to 2 parts. We started a shuttle service in the city I worked at, and there was a regular bus going around and nobody would use it. It's a boring, dull vehicle. But there's different types of buses. So we got a smaller bus that was completely open, and it was a fun experience just to be on the bus. And it went around much more slowly and compatibly with the pedestrian environment we're going to create. And so maybe something that is a little bit more tangible for people with a more outdoorsy-ish experience would be better than an enclosed air-conditioned type bus. So I think there's different types of buses. Second thing about the buses is that there are professional drivers in those, unlike the motorists. And so if it's buses and bikes, the drivers can be trained that when they go past cyclists, they go in a certain way, they go to a certain speed. If there's a certain amount of cyclists, they could even come to a stop, move over. You know, there's all sorts of things we can get a bus driver to do and not buzz people. They're a controllable asset on the parkway. And I think if there is a time where buses need to be there for equity reasons and so forth, that they could be made compatible, with the right training and the right vehicle. I also agree with Benoit that there's something charming about the grass shoulders of the parkway. It's one of the rare occasions where that design exists, and it'd be a shame to create the shoulders, because you know what would happen. They're going to be used for parking, picnicking. There's going to be all sorts of abuse on the shoulders, and when it looks more like a highway, people will actually drive faster. And I do agree that it will become a territorial thing, and that the motorists will take over the middle part, and you'll be left with the leftovers. So those are the 2 comments of dozens that I just wanted to share quickly. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Ian. We actually, if I can just a timekeeping note here. We had originally planned for about an hour and a half. There's plenty of discussion here. I'd like to keep it going if people would entertain sticking around for a few minutes longer. I think there's a lot of really valuable comments coming forward. Of course, anyone that needs to leave, please do so, but let's keep the discussion flowing if we can. So on that note, Danielle, I'd like to call on you to speak, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Neil. I'm not going to repeat everything our excellent the web friends just did, but I want to bring your attention to something that's not been shown. I'd like to see the buses are going to cost something. It's not going to be free. Well, it's not going to be free for the NCC. That is, and that it was announced that it was for the first year. we can expect fees later on. And I think we all want people to adopt that and move towards smaller buses more frequently and have less cars in the park, obviously. I want to see cars paying to access the park, and that's not been addressed. I don't know how much the NCC pays every year to put no parking signs everywhere, staff every intersection, and it's free, and I don't get it. And the buses are gonna have a toll on the roads. The amount of wear on the roadways is exponentially correlated with the size of the vehicles. So they're gonna damage the roads. So who's gonna pay for that in the long term? I would like to have the NCC's word on, not today, Catherine, merci, some other day, but on paying access more than just the parkings. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Daniel. I'm going to turn to Julie. Julie?
Oui, bonjour, hello. Yes, I'm an active user. I guess one of those people who uses it a lot. I do the loop of the park a few times a week, so I'm somebody who will go all the way up to the Champlain Lookout and back down. That being said, obviously, I'm very comfortable around cars and all that, but that being said, I have had a few close calls myself. However, I do obviously prefer having times when there's just active users, but not people just like me only. Obviously, I have 2 kids as well, and so sometimes I have them come up, not all the way to Champlain Lookout, but a little bit. And obviously they're not as comfortable or as fast as I am. So including all types of active users is obviously very important. But also other people who are not active users. My father, who's now passed away, he wanted to go to Champlain Lookout. He couldn't ride a bike that far, obviously. And so he liked going up in a car. So I completely understand the idea of, being able to have it accessible to all people. However, there are unfortunately people who speed, and like I said, I've had a few close calls myself where cars have tried to pass me, and I was going myself pretty fast, over 40, 50, 60 kilometers an hour going downhill, and cars are still trying to pass me. So trying to please everyone is impossible. You'll never be able to please everyone. We all agree with that. But I think having different times would be great where, like, for example, if it's just for cars, just won't go at that time. And I think having times for buses is great, as shuttle. So I don't know if we can think of a time. And personally, I would go myself Saturday morning or Sunday morning, but I understand that not everyone can do that. So maybe, having, like, for active users only, no buses, no shuttles, let's say like Wednesday afternoons, Saturday mornings, and Sunday afternoons, or something like that. And then buses only, and again, we talked about speed limits and electric, maybe like Saturday afternoons and Tuesday afternoons and Thursday afternoons, or something like that. And then a time for cars only. So again, thinking of a plan, something that there would be times where cars are allowed, times where buses only, shuttles are allowed, and times where active users, whether they're more elite or more family oriented, would be it would be for them. The other thing too is a friend of mine and somebody else mentioned about roller skiing. What about roller skiing? Because there is the P8, P9 roller skiing that we do, but some people, we also go up higher than P8, P9, practicing going uphill and downhill on Fortune and whatever. So although I'm a very comfortable cyclist on roller skis coming down, I would not want to be passed by a bus or by a car or whatever. So thinking about that as well. And somebody else said earlier about the lesser of two evils. I do think that having buses is the lesser of two evils with cars, but I can also see how permitting some cars going at some points is also important. But again, like the previous person said, maybe having some payment method as well. When you go into various parks, you do have to pay for using it, whatever. So something like that as well. So anyways, that's all I wanted to say. Merci.
Thank you, Julie. Tom, over to you.
Thank you. Tom Young. I've lived in the Gatineau Park for over 35 years. I'm a member of the Kingsmere Community Association, and we've seen the various iterations of park access for decades. One thing that I don't hear a lot of discussion about tonight is what I would consider the first principle of the Gatineau Park, and that it is that it's a nature park, and it's designed to be enjoyed by all. So equal access is an extremely important concept if you consider that it's a nature park. If you discard the idea that it's a nature park and instead turn it into a playground or a sports track, as somebody suggested tonight, then it's a different animal. And Catherine, I'm sure you can interrupt me if you like, Catherine, but she will tell me that a great deal of the National Capital Commission resources are spent on the environment, the ecology, the nature aspects of the park to make it a nature experience, especially for urban people who don't have access to such things. The urban active user has, again, compliments of the NCC, use of urban parkways, urban roads, urban bike paths. Somebody from the cycling community here can tell me how many hundreds of kilometers of bike paths there are in the National Capital Region, or the Outaouais for that matter. And since the Gatineau Parkway, it should actually probably be renamed to the Gatineau Park Access Road. The Gatineau Parkway is the core access route to the nature parks. So all people, the intention is that all people use that route to access the nature park. Obviously, vehicular tie-ups and internal combustion engines are not desirable. Any e-transport, cycling, anything that's good for the environment is certainly a complement to the nature park ethic. And there's no complaint that way. The challenge is, of course, to find a way for all Canadians, all people, the park is funded by the taxpayer, to enjoy the park and not be excluded from it when certain special interest groups want to use it for their purposes other than a nature park. So that's my take on it. And I would just encourage people to go home tonight and think that the Gatineau Park is more than just a sports track. It is a nature park for people of all ages, all abilities, and all sizes, all shapes to enjoy. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Tom. Susan, over to you.
Hey, I'm Susan, and I work with Parkways for People. I've really enjoyed this discussion, and one thing about it is I'm actually not a super active user of Gatineau Park. I'm a very infrequent user of the park, but I do enjoy going up there. And when we were planning for this discussion, one thing that came up, and I was really happy to see it, was because we were talking a lot about equity and access and how people get to the park. And one thing that's really important for me is to think about people who don't have cars. So I think, we can talk about accessibility in terms of people who have different physical abilities, but then there are people who don't have cars, are not allowed to drive, not able to drive, or just can't afford to drive. And so I really applaud the NCC for moving forward with a vision that will allow more people who live in the city of Ottawa to actually get up to Gatineau Park and discover, I just as you said, the nature of the park, and be able to go walk on the trails and just experience something different. And to me, even though I don't go to Gatineau Park every day or every week like some people do, I do think it's a really vital asset for the whole region and the city. And so anything that moves us towards visions for the park that start looking away from having people bring their private vehicles into the park is going to make it better for everybody and preserve its longevity. And as our population grows, if we don't start moving away from having private vehicles be the way that you come to Gatineau Park, the park is going to become less pleasant and less natureful. And one vision that I have experienced in my life that I thought was really fascinating was, about 5 years ago, my family and I went to Zion National Park in Utah. And I don't know, many of you might be familiar with it. It's an iconic national park, and it's extremely popular. Like, we were there in the summer and it was just packed with people. But they had already made the change. I don't know how many years previously, probably a decade before, but because that park, which, you know, it's in Utah and it has an access road that runs through the middle of it, and it had become a traffic jam. It was like, you know, driving through Houston in the middle of the day. So they made the call that you're just not allowed to drive private vehicles in Zion National Park anymore. You access the park, you pay to enter it, then you park your car, and they have a shuttle service that runs through all of the park, runs out to all of the trailheads. The buses or the shuttles are accessible. They're smaller. I don't know if they're fun in the way that Ian was proposing, which seemed like a really good idea, but they are small. And I can't remember if there were cyclists on the road, but I can see how it would be compatible to have these smaller shuttles that are running frequently, you know, because they're not moving fast. They're not going 100 kilometers an hour. They're just meandering through, and this is how you experience the park. And so just in terms of the longevity and accessibility and way forward, I just want to say, like, I think it's great that the NCC is moving forward with this. And, you know, obviously some work needs to be done to address everybody's concerns, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
Thanks very much, Susan. Would anyone else like to jump in at this point? You know, if not, I'd like to actually invite, actually, I see Erin's got her hand up. So Erin, come on in, or
yes, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Erin.
Thanks. Yes, and just to continue on that vein, with what Susan said, you know, I think too about accessibility, people of color, lower income individuals who are not able to access. And I haven't taken a look at the map of the shuttle bus, but offering transportation to those in those neighborhoods that might be more affected by income disparity would be just such an equitable move. I think in opening up the park to those communities that would really struggle to get there and would not have access to a car. I think too about if the NCC is considered like ever doing any outreach, you know, programming like that would make, you know, Gatineau Park Parkways more accessible. Feel like for those people who have been excluded maybe from these discussions over time, there may be a systemic biases in place that have prevented them from feeling welcome or able to access that. If the NCC would open up that like programming that would allow for just maybe Gatineau Park cycling for newcomers or for people new to like e-bikes or mobility devices, or to invite them to try and to invite maybe some facilitation along with that, because you know, it can be you know, a scary thing to kind of go across, you know, and sort of try something new when you feel that you may not have been, you're not you know, expressly you're not unwelcome, but it's not something that's been offered to you in that way before. So I'm kind of interested in if there's any opportunities to be more explicit about outreach, specific programming, in order to make the park even more inclusive to those communities. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Erin. Anyone last chance to come in before I invite our two speakers to join in and offer any concluding comments that they would like to include. So maybe I can start with Catherine. Catherine, would you like to say any last words here?
I think I would need to talk for Catherine, but she's having issues with her laptop right now and is trying to plug back in.
Well, tell you what, Ian, why don't we turn it to you and ask if there's any concluding comments you'd like to make?
So one of my takeaways is there's lots of different viewpoints on this, and I think from a public policy perspective, the NCC is going to have to think really long and hard about what's in the interest of the resource. Like Tom was saying, you know, it is a nature resource. We have to protect it the most. At the same time, we need to give people, all types of people, access to it. Yeah, some of the other parks, like the one that was mentioned where the cars aren't allowed at all, you know, that is one option. Maybe there is a balance with the cars or the buses, but that's something that has to be worked out. And I think that the NCC is doing the right thing by trying, you know, trial and error. I guess I'd be categorized in one of those elite cyclist groups, because I would ride 20 miles to get to the park and then go through the park and ride back home again. And so, but I design bike facilities for a living for all sorts of different types of riders all over North America. And we do need to make it comfortable for, families, for beginners. So it's a really quite a delicate balancing act that needs to be achieved. And I would suggest making it predictable and consistent so people know when to expect things to happen, and let it know, like somebody was talking about outreach, let people know so that they can come and enjoy the park. And maybe everyone can enjoy the park in the same way at the same time all the time. The idea about e-bikes, e-bikes are a game changer. For those of you who have never used one, they flatten hills. They do all sorts of cool things. I'd be very careful though about how fast they're designed for. There's different grades of e-bikes, and so I would encourage the kind that go under 30 kilometers an hour, because otherwise they're intimidating for other people too. I think that loop idea that Johanna had was kind of interesting, so that the buses don't necessarily have to pass in the same or opposite directions. But I don't know how feasible that is because of just the layout of the street network. I do have to just emphasize though that the space needs and the power and the lack of professionalism by most drivers in the park can spoil a resource for everybody. So if I had to disadvantage one group or put them in a certain time frame, it would be the most dangerous group of people that use the park, and the people that use the most space and the most resources. That would be the motorists. So if I had to err on the side of caution, those are the folks I would push back on in a natural area like that. And just for the record, riding in Gatineau Park is one of my favorite things to do. I've been doing it since I was a little kid in the 60s, and I'll do it for the rest of my life. So thanks for having that resource available for me and everyone else. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Catherine, would you like to say a few remarks?
Yes, thanks. I'd like to thank everybody, for being frank and tell us, everything that they had to say. I want to reassure everybody that we actually listen to what you've been saying, and some of the worries you have. Let's say just about 2 buses crossing on Fortune. We are taking that into account already. So. Thank you for welcoming me here, and me and my team, because there's other members of the team listening as well. We've taken good notes, and I encourage you to, if you want to have discussions with your particular groups too, so that we can exchange that, reach out to us, and we'll be available for that. And we're hopefully going to announce the schedule for the opening or closure, the way you see it, of the Parkway soon. And no, I can't address everything that's being said, but it was very informative, and I think a good discussion to hear what everybody had to say and the different points of views.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, listen, on that note, I'd like to wrap up here, and I just want to start by thanking our 2 speakers. I want to thank thank Ian for that bold visioning, and I want to thank Catherine for coming here and really being genuinely listening to the concerns of the community, and to take those thoughts under consideration. And I think it's important for all of us to remember that our starting point here is that, I think we all understand that the Gatineau Park is this incredible resource, and that the NCC has done an incredible job in managing it for us. So, and quite frankly, it's in many ways, it's unlike anything else that I've ever come across in the world, just in terms of how accessible it is, and just the quality of what the experience is. So I really, I just want to always take the opportunity to congratulate the NCC for the job that they've done, because it really is something else. And we're having a discussion about how do we take something that's like already an A+, and how do we turn it into an A++. So that's it's a very we're very happy to be in this position, and of course there's a number of us that have seen the evolution of the park over a number of years, and quite frankly have liked what we've seen, and we don't want to see any of that roll back. I mean, so that's we're here to. I think our message to the NCC is we're here to support you, and we just. We think that through dialogue we can come up with some ideas that maybe haven't been considered that will make for the best possible experience. So on that note, let me just wrap up and say, as we've heard from Catherine, NCC will be coming forward with next steps fairly soon. I think I heard an invitation to have follow-up discussions with different groups that are interested in having those. Certainly encourage people to take that up on that. And so Catherine, I'm going to say that we're all awaiting your announcement with great anticipation. So we look forward to that. So thanks again to everyone, and have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.